is Al McGee with YETicket.com. Hey, I'm here talking to Marq Evans, and he directed a film called The Glamour and the Squalor. And well, we'll tell you more about it, but I'm surprised at this film because I didn't know anything about the subject matter in this film. And so, Mark, tell me about it.
Yeah, and Marco Collins is who the film's about, and I didn't know
Yeah.
anything about him when I first kind of discovered this story. So I was, which I think was good because I think I was learning about it as I went. Um,
Well,
but
how did you know about the story at first?
yeah.
I mean,
So
who brought it to your attention?
so it was the radio, which so Marco Collins is a radio DJ that was really prominent still today, but really prominent in the early 90s. He pressed play as a very important radio DJ on like the grunge music scene, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, the music that came out of Seattle in the 90s. So and then bands like Beck and Weezer. But I was very familiar with the music. That was the music that I grew up with. But I didn't know Marco or his story. But in 2011, I was in Seattle, and the radio station that's still around today, 107.7 The End, they were doing a 20-year anniversary of their radio station. So they were playing back the top 107 songs in the history of the station. And then they had the prominent radio DJs come back and tell their best stories of the time at the radio station. And every time this Marco Collins came on and told a story, it was just like must hear radio. It was just a great story, being right in this music scene at the time. And I was captivated. I'd go get groceries just so I could listen, and then I'd get home and I would just sit in my car listening to his stories. And I thought this could be a great film. And at the time I thought maybe I would write a script and it would be a narrative film. But as I started doing more research, and kind of doing research on Marco Collins himself, I realized that he had a great story and he'd be a great subject for a documentary. So reached out to him, and I think it took about 6 months before he finally signed on and said
Yes.
yes, I'll do this. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started.
Well, that's one thing I liked about this film, or this documentary, is that you had Marco himself in it telling his own story. Because, I've seen many documentaries where other people told that person's story. Either they're dead or they're alive, but they refuse to say anything in the documentary. Oh, I was glad of that. Now, but Marco was an interesting guy. Again, I never heard of him because that was in Seattle. I'm from the Midwest.
Where are you from?
And so I'm from Chicago originally, but now I live in Florida. Okay. And so I never heard of the guy. And so it was very interesting to know about Marco and what he did there in Seattle on the radio and him growing up. Tell us a little bit more about him, especially when he was a young kid, how he used to get beat up because, at the time, he really didn't come out and say he was gay, but people kind of figured it out because he was a little different. He was a little different than they were.
Yeah, and I think when he was a kid, he was bullied and stuff. And I don't necessarily think, it was because he was gay, but it's because he was maybe different. But it's so interesting, his story, because he was also like the prom king. So he was very popular, but he didn't ever feel like he was able to be his true self. It wasn't until much later in his life where he felt like he could be himself. And really where he felt that was the Seattle music scene in the 90s, the bands like Nirvana, who were much more open as people than bands in the rock industry had been before. And we kind of go into that in the film a little bit too. But a lot of it, I think, stems from, childhood at home with his dad. He had a rough relationship really always with his dad because his dad was a police officer, kind of a man's man. And that's what he wanted for his son. He wanted his son to play, football and to be, and that's just not what Marco was into. He was more into the arts and into music. And I think that really, as Marco navigated, childhood and then beyond. And this is what we found when we were editing the film, that we kind of found this one word that we thought represented his whole story, which was acceptance. Wanting the acceptance from his dad to love him as he was, who he was. And then he found that acceptance with these bands that he was helping break. And he found it with an audience of millions of people. And I think that's a lot of his stories. And when he wasn't feeling that he was getting the acceptance, I think that's one of the things maybe that drove him to, addiction challenges that he had.
His father was named Jerry Collins. And he's a police officer, and they really didn't like him in the home that they were living in at the time with his father, but Marco's mother accepted him as he was, and he really loved his mother, and his mother really loved him, and she did not put any limits on him whatsoever. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about his mom?
Yeah, and sadly, I never got to meet his mom. She passed away. Years ago, and that was a very heavy thing for Marco. And to me, one of the most powerful lines in the whole film is when he's talking about losing her. He got to take her backstage, Clay Aiken and everything, but he makes the comment where he says, that he went to her funeral, that he said he's tearing up, and he says, I showed up for that. I didn't miss that because he had this kind of track record of missing things, letting his addiction prevent him from being there for important moments. And and when he reflects, he didn't miss that. He was there to be with his mom when she passed away. And then and his dad actually passed away not long after the movie came out. But it was so important, I think, for them to reconcile, and his dad Jerry coming to terms and loving Marco for who he was. There was a big transformation with his dad. And
well, because too, at that time too, people have changed, and their ideas about homosexuality and men and women had changed at that time too. So Jerry went along with it also because everyone has changed, and he finally accepted his son. But I feel that Marco, he did play all the different genres of music, including rap, including alternative, when he was on the radio station. But he wanted something different to play instead of all the regular things that they play. Did Mark ever tell you why he wanted to play different stuff, different things? I think he kind of explained it in the film a little bit.
Yeah, I think what he always wanted to do and still does is he loves, what really gets him going is sharing something new and different to an audience, whether that's one person that's a friend of his and saying, hey, listen to this, or when he was on the radio station, it was millions of people. That's what drives him. He loves that feeling of just sharing something new. And it just so happened that in the early 90s, when he did that, he had this big platform, and it changed music, changed the world. But he still does it today, and it's just a smaller audience that he has because the industry is so fragmented and everything. But yeah, he's always looking for something different, but he's just looking for something that has like emotion and that he loves, that he can share and make somebody's day with a new song.
Yeah, exactly. And let's go back to his high school days too. Marco really did not talk a lot about high school friends. Did he have a lot of high school friends when he was in high school?
He did, yeah. I mean, he was an extremely popular kid. Like I said, he was, I think it was either prom or homecoming. He was the king. And
he was the prom king.
Yeah. And so there is one high school friend that's in the film, James, drawing a blank on his last name. But yeah, so it's just an interesting dynamic, though. Like, he was bullied all the way through, but then in high school, really kind of found himself. But this wasn't in the film, but I remember he called himself one of the world's best actors, because through high school he felt like he was acting, he was playing a role. And it's so sad. Like, yeah, he had these great experiences, he was very popular, but to not really, he's hiding himself, his true identity. And that had to be really, really rough, especially when you'd come home and then you had the relationship with his dad like he did. That had to be really tough times.
Yeah, because he said that when his mother and father got divorced and the father moved out, he and his sister was very happy that happened, even though they felt sorry for his mom about it. But they were very happy that the father left, because he was an alcoholic himself.
Yep. And then he ended up getting clean cold turkey for a relationship. He remarried, and basically his new wife said, you're done with that, or I'm gone. And he went cold turkey, and he'd been sober for, when I interviewed him, this must've been 2014. He'd been sober for over 20 years. And I think that was also still kind of a dynamic with him and Marco, that he had this feeling of like, well, I did it, why can't you? And he kind of hung that over Marco's head still, which I think was a little bit difficult. And Marco's been clean now for over 3 years, and obviously when you're in that, it's it's a lifelong thing, so he's going to continue to have to work on that. But he's been on a good stretch, so it's nice to see that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that because I used to be a drug counselor myself, and again, I did all those things, all those drugs, and I got off of them too. I had to go to rehab too. I felt that though Marco was very self-destructive, when the big opportunities came for him, he did not try to achieve the goal when those big opportunities came for him. Did he explain that to you?
Yeah, and it's hearing you say that, it's interesting because I probably would have, if I were making this movie today, I probably would have drilled down on that a little bit more and try to identify why. He must have been afraid of something. There's a book, the War of Art, and it's about like resistance and why people can be why we can all be self-destructive sometimes, and it comes down to some sort of fear of being successful, or fear or whatever, because he had this certain amount of success, but you may be talking about when they wanted him to be like TV personality on VH1 to compete against MTV.
Yeah.
And at this time, this was like the big thing.
Oh,
and and he blew it. He stayed out, he was on a bender for like 2 nights, showed up and haven't not slept for 48 hours. So I think maybe I kind of chalked it up to, well, that's what addicts do. They're just, they don't, but I think but is there something more to it? Is there a reason that he decided at that moment, I know I've got this big opportunity, but maybe is there a fear of something, fear of, maybe it's a fear of failure, right? That, if now I have an excuse. If I don't get this job, it's because I did it to myself versus I just didn't get it because, I wasn't good enough. So maybe there's it's like a built-in excuse maybe to be able to have.
Yeah, and that's another term too called fear of success.
Yeah.
Many people are afraid to being a success. Well, let's talk about you, Marq, a little bit. And you're a success with this film. How did you get started being a director, and how did you get started doing documentaries? This was your second documentary, right?
This is my first.
Oh, yeah, it's my first one?
My first film, yeah. I started making a movie earlier and it's still being made. So I out of college, I spent like 7 years working in sales and management and was doing well. And, it was one of those things where like the better you're doing, the harder it is to like get away from it because, making a lot of money and spending a lot of money and these things, but I just never enjoyed it. And I wanted to do something more creative. My older brother was in the film industry. Right after he went to college, he moved out to LA and, was a PA and all those things, and ended up being a director and a producer. And so I kind of was keeping an eye on what he was doing and thought this looks pretty cool. And then, my stepdad, his dad passed away in 2010. And then there was the earthquake in Haiti happened right at that same time. And that kind of drew us to go down to Haiti, my brother and I, and we started making a documentary there that, like I said, we're still making. It's turned into like a Boyhood type thing, like over many, many years. And then I got the bug immediately. Like I just loved the filmmaking process and the editing process really. So I just was immediately kind of like in tune to stories. And when I came across this story, it just was something that I thought, I want to make this. I want to make this. And, it's funny in hindsight, like, I don't, maybe it wasn't the best movie to make as a first film because it was pretty challenging. But I just got obsessed with it. And, it was a 5-year process to make the film.
Oh, really?
Years. Well, the idea first was 2011, and then, raising the money, and we shot a ton. Like I was scrubbing through the film again today. It'd been a while since I'd seen it. And, my new movie that'll be coming out this summer is a lot of archival footage. Whereas this, we shot the majority of the movie, or it's animated or whatever. So,
I enjoyed that animation.
Yeah. There was a lot that went into this, but yeah, as a director, I feel like I'm still getting started in a sense. I've been doing it for 10 years now, but still just, learning every day and just have, all kinds of projects that I can't wait to work on someday.
So you get a big thrill out of making films and things like that. Oh, that's good, man.
I love
as long as your passion. Yeah.
Yeah. I love doing it.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to Marco real quick, because he's a very interesting guy. But like I said, I never heard of him before this because, again, I'm in the Midwest, I'm in the South, and I love all types of music, alternative. I love that music, and I love other, all the music. I love all music. That's one thing I liked about Marco. He loves all music.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he had his success early on with alternative and this grunge, but then in 1996, he personally was really starting to get into, what we think of as like electronic music.
Right.
And that hadn't made its way to America yet. There was, because a lot of these bands were from Europe actually, and he would go to Europe. I mean, it was part of his partying days. He would go to Europe and he would go to the clubs, but he would also look for music to bring back to the United States and to play on his radio station that had millions of people. So he was the first person to play groups like Daft Punk and the Prodigy and the Chemical Brothers. They ended up being these massive, massive groups that also ended up changing music. I mean, so he was really involved in two different genres of music that changed music. And then, he's super into hip hop. He'll put out country stuff sometimes. It doesn't matter what the genre is. As long as it sounds good to him, he wants people to hear it. And he's not resting on what he did in the past. He's still looking to introduce people to new music today. He kind of is almost hesitant to tell the stories from the past because he doesn't want to be defined by that. So I remember encouraging him to be like, well, you can still do this new music thing, but also share these stories because people want to hear them and they're important. So it's, finding the balance between the past and the present and the future.
Exactly. And I'm glad he did tell a story in this documentary. Now, here's a question for you that I saw in him. Has he really accepted his homosexuality? Because he really not in a relationship. He really never talked. He had some boyfriends, but he never really had a real relationship. Did he really accept himself as a homosexual?
I think so. I think it took a long time though, and I think he was terrified of people finding out. And you see that in the film. And there's kind of a funny scene where he's at a concert and the lead singer basically outs him without knowing that he's actually gay. But I think really, and it might have taken until his dad showed that he accepted him for who he really was. It might have taken up to that point. But I think he would love nothing more than to be in a healthy relationship. And for whatever reason, he hasn't found that right person. But I think he's now come to terms, and I think that's probably also helped him with his sobriety as well too. That he's been on a run, and I think it's because he's comfortable with who he is and accepts himself for who he is.
Yeah, because I was a little confused about it because, like he said in the documentary, he really didn't have a real relationship, and he really did not have that type of love that he feel that he should have from the other person. And that's what I got from the documentary. Just one more question, Marq. Now, you talked about your next project, but why do you like documentaries? I know this is your first one. You're doing another one right now. Why do you like documentaries?
Well, one, I feel like I know how to do them. I think I started making this film in Haiti, and when we started piecing that together, I made this. It's like, I know, okay, I can find a story and I know how to make it an engaging story. And I don't really think too much of a difference between like documentary and narrative, feature narrative. To me, it's just all telling good stories. Right. And I think like, structurally, when I'm looking at like, how do I want to structure a documentary, I'm thinking more in like 3-act cinematic structure. So I don't really find too much of a difference, but it's just a genre. And when I'm watching things too, it's rare that I'll watch like a big blockbuster movie. I just generally am more attracted to well-done documentaries. So, and also reading. I mean, I probably read books more than any other form of like media. And, in a way, a lot of, the books that I'm reading are like documentaries if they're about somebody or something like that. So it's just, I don't know, it's just a genre that kind of makes sense to me. And I feel like I enjoy it. And also I know what I'm doing in that world. Whereas, there's projects that I'm developing that aren't documentaries and I'm excited for them. But it's one of those, like, they're gonna be more challenging because I've got to kind of learn a little bit more about that kind of filmmaking.
Yeah, I'm like you. I read a lot of nonfiction more than fiction when I read it, but I do watch a lot of fiction, in films and things like that, superhero movies, love stories, but I read a lot of nonfiction. Hey, Marq, thanks for taking time with me, Al McGee here, yeticket.com. Hey, you're a very fascinating cat, man. And, next time your film comes out, get in touch with me so I can interview you to help promote your film. I love to do that for you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Al. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you very much. And again, much more success to you in the future.
You too.
All right.
This is your entertainment. something great.